but I generally do not like bugs. It's like catching bugs is probably my favorite thing in Animal Crossing because you get rid of them. Like, go sell it to that dragon who wants to take your bugs. I'm cool with that. Take my bugs, Flick. It's fine. All right, so I hope you are having a wonderful day today. So the last time that we were here, we were talking about the relationship between our attitudes and our behavior. So the example that I gave last time was, do you believe that exercising can help you to be healthy? And many of you said yes. And then I asked you, how many of you regularly exercise? And generally what I tended to find was that the student athletes, well, they exercise every day because, well, that's kind of part of their job, you know, student athlete. But most of you that are not athletes are like, no. So we have this instance where we know that an attitude is important, but we don't necessarily always follow through with our behavior. So let's talk a little bit about why, and let's kind of unpack that. So as I kind of talked about last time, generally the more specific your attitude is, the more predictive it is of your behavior. I'm almost out of my hand cream. Oh, this is so sad. I have more coming, but I don't think it's going to come until next week. So this is going to be a rough weekend. I'm going to have like dragon hands. So generally, the more specific your attitude is, if you believe that it's important to get at least 30 minutes of exercise a day or 30 minutes every other day, that's much more specific than regular exercise is important. And because of that, you're going to be more likely to have that attitude be predictive of behavior. And by the way, this kind of fits with goals too. If there's a goal that you want to achieve, generally, a more specific goal is going to be better than a very, very general goal. I'm thirsty. Sorry, I've been talking and I haven't even taken so much as a breath. It's time to get something to drink. Okay.
I like that you put the straw in your mouth before you put the straw in the drink.
Okay, so there's a reason that I do that, because when you have a fizzy drink, the fizzy makes the liquid come out of the straw and it makes a mess. So putting it in your mouth first when you're drinking a fizzy drink, whether it's seltzer or soda, tends to help. So the last time we were here, I also talked about the fact that attitudes that are formed from direct experience, like Dr. Gilchrist falling out of a vehicle because she wasn't wearing the seatbelt, those tend to be more predictive of our behavior. Additionally, negative attitudes tend to be developed much more quickly. Positive attitudes tend to form much more slowly. Fogging up. But okay, so attitudes are going to be formed through experience and through socialization. So we have something called the mere exposure effect. This is not only going to come through and affect attitudes, it also affects our relationships. So how many of you have had this happen? You hear a song on the radio and you're like, meh, it's okay. And then the next time you hear it, you're like, I love it. So this kind of happened to me the other day. I was shuffling through my Apple Music radio and a song by Imagine Dragons comes on. And let's be really clear. Yes, I know that Imagine Dragons is basically spicy Nickelback, but I kind of like some Nickelback. I also kind of like some Imagine Dragons, and there's no shame in that. I like all kinds of stuff. So I heard this song and I'm like, this is okay. And then the next day I was walking the dog. I'm like, I want to hear that again. And so what we tend to find is that the more that you are exposed to something, the more familiar that you are with something, the more you tend to like it. And this is what's called the mere exposure effect. Researchers have actually found that if you show students Chinese characters and they don't actually know what those Chinese characters mean, students that have been pre-exposed to some of those Chinese characters will like those more than brand new ones. That's pretty interesting. You can also kind of see this with your photos. So here's an example. So this is an older picture, and yes, that is me when I'm not wearing my glasses, and that's baby Smedley. He's less than a year old here. So when I look at myself in my selfies and my photographs and things like that, and when I look in the mirror, this is what I tend to see. Now, here's what's kind of interesting. I like this picture of myself. I do not like this picture of myself. And part of the reason why is that at least here in this photo, this matched what I saw in the mirror. This one does not match what I see in the mirror. Also, my hair is clearly not that short anymore. And yes, that is Dr. Roy, and we're making paintings because we're friends. So here's what's kind of interesting though. So you tend to like the pictures that look like your mirror image. You like the pictures that look like your selfies. Other people don't like those pictures as much as you do. They like the ones that actually look like what you look like when you're not looking in the mirror. So if I took a picture right now of how I'm looking right now, I probably would not like it as much as you do because it looks weird to me. It doesn't look like me. It looks like a reversal of me. But for other people, this actually looks like how they see you. And they like that more than your selfie image. So go back and look through a few photos that you don't like. Think a little bit about why. Think about, is it because of my mirror image? Or I tend to not like how I look in a lot of photos because my face moves around too much. So you always catch me like, even when I was a kid, like I'm just too expressive. Like I'm that kid that had to get photo retakes because my eyes would be closed every time, every single time. And that's kind of one of the benefits of masks right now. I don't make wonky faces. How could I? You don't see anything from the nose down. So check out your photos and see if this is happening with you. Additionally, conditioning and social exposure also affect the kind of attitudes that you have. So for example, maybe you don't like smoking because one time you tried to smoke and it made you sick. You get some classical conditioning there. You associate that illness with the cigarette, and you're going to be less likely to try it as a result. So our attitudes can be explicit or they can be implicit. And our unconscious attitudes do subtly influence our behavior. This is what we call an implicit attitude. And this is usually due to socialization. It's also due to our culture, which does privilege certain groups of people over others, like we talked about last time. And these are things that are automatically accessed. So these are things that you may not necessarily be aware of, and it does require you to be a bit mindful. And as we kind of talked about last time, you can actually test these with something called the implicit association test, or the IAT. Okay, does anybody need some more time here? Zoe, do you need more time? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happens when attitudes end up not being perfect predictors of our behavior. So what happens when attitudes and behavior conflict? Let me see. Does somebody need me to go back? What kind of questions would be on the IAT to test that? Would you like me to go through an example so you can see what it looks like? Okay, we can do that. I am totally fine with doing that. All right, so let me go ahead and get out of this. Da-da-da-da. So we're going to go back to what I showed you last time, Project Implicit. So it's implicit.harvard.edu. You can try these for yourselves. So we're going to go ahead and take a test. Okay, so does anybody have one that they want to try? So reading some of the ones on here, somebody let me know one they'd be interested in taking. Huh? Let me see. Let me go in the chat. Is there anyone that looks kind of interesting here to you? Okay, we found one. Okay. Maybe skin tone? Okay, we can do that one. So this is an IAT that requires the ability to recognize light and dark skinned faces. So here's kind of what this is going to look like. Okay, so, okay, I'll fill these out. I'm okay with that. So I'm assigned female at birth. I'm female. Well, I identify as female. December. What is your birth year? All right, all right. Dr. Gilchrist is old. Dr. Gilchrist is old. She was born back in the 20th century. Okay, what is my race? I am white. I am not Hispanic or Latino. I've taken a lot of these. Well, here's why. The implicit association test was really starting to become a thing back in like 2001. So I took a lot of these in college. Like, to put this into perspective, when I was in college, I actually took the IAT for Bush versus Gore. Like, that's one of the first IATs I ever did. And I'm like, what do I have a preference for, Bush or Gore? I'm like, neither. Okay. All right. Yeah. Just to be clear, that's my ideology. I do not believe that you have to be the same. All right, what's my religious affiliation? I'm torn between Christian or Buddhist. I'm a little both. I'm slightly religious. Okay. I'm from the United States. I'm from the United States. What's the postal code? Oh, that's tricky. Where have I lived the longest? Ooh, oh, I know. Florida. Just barely. I've only lived here for like 7 years. Eventually that will catch up with me, but I lived in Florida for 18 years. So yeah. Okay. Highest level of education. Yeah. Okay. Full-time education. I'm a professor, not a post-secondary teacher. Okay. Ooh, okay, this is tricky. I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I haven't really thought about it. They're just people. They're just people. I actually would like mine to be a little darker. I think I'm too pale, especially in winter. I'm medium. No, I'm light medium. There we go. Compared with others, I'm a little darker, especially in the summer. Okay. So here's how this works. We're only going to do a few of these, so I'm not going to complete the whole thing because we just don't have the time. So we're going to use the E and the I computer keys. So this is how the implicit association task works. So what you do is you have items that are good. So good sounding adjectives versus bad sounding adjectives. And then you also have to classify faces as light or dark. These just look like comic book people. Okay. So the instructions for this are going to change. So in this case, we're just going to categorize light-skinned people and dark-skinned people. So it's E for light-skinned people, I for dark-skinned people. Now, I'm the one doing this, not you. So don't press the keys on your keyboard. I'm the one doing this. Okay, so. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. So what they're basically trying to do here is they're trying to get a baseline level. So they're looking at the rate that at which you categorize spaces. So now they're going to do the same thing with your adjectives. So we're going to do the same thing. So it's E for bad words, I for good words. Oh, like annoying is good. Okay, so here's where the implicit associations come in. So here's what they're going to look at. So, okay, so here you have to press the E key for bad words or white faces. Here, you have to press the I key for good words or dark faces. So we're going to do just a few of these, and I'll kind of tell you how the rest of the logic of this kind of setup works. Okay, so it's bad or white or light, good and dark for I. Oh. Okay, so the kind of idea here, what they're going to do is they're going to eventually switch these up. So sometimes you're going to have bad words paired with dark faces and good words paired with light faces. They're going to be looking at your reaction time, and they're going to be looking at your error rate to basically get a measure of implicit bias. So here's the thing. Your implicit bias can be modified with the kind of experiences that you have. So people are going to be a little bit different. So for example, I know that one time when I took the IAT, I found that I had no preference. Now that can obviously change over time. And additionally, with the implicit association test, there are some questions as to its reliability. And I think those are valid concerns. I also think that there are ways to game it, which are also concerns. And those are some scientific issues for another time. But this is one of the ways that you can look at that. So I would encourage you, if you're interested to see what kind of implicit biases you have, check out Project Implicit. It might be worth checking out. You might learn something about yourself, and plus it's kind of fun. They're constantly collecting data. So you might find it pretty interesting. So let's talk about what happens when you have an attitude, but it turns out that your behavior conflicts with your attitude. So for example, let's say that you think it is important to help people who are needy. So you want to help people who are needy. And a homeless person comes up to you and asks you for money or for food. You choose not to help them. So in this case, you have a behavior that is in conflict with your attitude. So this is a case where you believe it's important to help people in need, and you just chose not to. So what happens is all of a sudden, we have a conflict between our attitude and our behavior. And this is what is referred to as cognitive dissonance. This is a state of tension that results when you contradict your attitudes. And what researchers actually find is that when our attitudes and our behavior conflict, we often end up changing our attitudes as a result. So for example, if you chose not to give money to a homeless person and yet you believe that it's important to help the needy, instead of going, I'm not a perfect person, I need to reconsider whether or not my behavior falls in line with my attitudes. A lot of people choose not to do that. That requires a lot of self-reflection. That requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires a lot of humility. Not everybody has that. And also, that takes time. That takes work. It's a lot easier to change our attitude instead, and that's what most of us do. So if you end up not giving money to a homeless person, but you believe it's important to help the needy, what you're probably going to do is modify your attitude. So maybe you say something like, well, I only help people that are deserving. That person looked like they were drunk. So we end up changing our attitude as a result. So you can see this in a lot of ways. Dare I say that one of the biggest ways that we've kind of seen this right now is, we got to talk about conspiracy theories. Just a little bit. I will keep it pretty short. So we got to talk a little bit about stuff kind of related to QAnon, because now that people are spending more time at home, people spend a lot more time on the internet, and that allows ideas that you might find in something like QAnon to spread. So this is obviously a very, very complex theory, and if you want to know about it, trust me, there are articles after articles about it. And some of the ideas don't sound all that odd, but as you dig deeper, some of the ideas are just like, yeah, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. But some people really do believe it. And based on the predictions of QAnon, which has really been kind of running around for about the past 4 or 5 years, it's kind of interesting that a lot of the predictions that were said to take place, the things that were supposed to take place, didn't happen. So you believe in something, you believe that something is going to happen, and it doesn't happen. What do most believers do in those cases? Do they abandon the idea? No, they tend to double down even harder and say, oh, it's still coming. It's still coming. It's going to happen. It's just not happened yet. It's not the right time. And the thing is, this is not me like ragging. I mean, this is not me ragging on QAnon. This happens with a variety of different conspiracy theories. This happens with a lot of different things. One of the ways that you can actually kind of see this is if you go to like doomsday cults. So I'm going to pull up something. I would say if you want to read a really cool article about cognitive dissonance and how this kind of comes into play when we talk about things like conspiracy theories or prophecies or things like that. Look up the Atlantic article, the Christmas, the aliens didn't come. It is one of my favorite articles. So what a failed doomsday prophecy taught psychologists about the nature of belief. So I'll read a little bit of this to you, but this is based off of Leon Festinger's work. So Leon Festinger and his associate Carl Smith, they wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails, and it's all about cognitive dissonance. Oh, you have no idea. Okay. At 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, 1954, a small group of people gathered on the street outside Dorothy Martin's home in Oak Park, Illinois, singing Christmas carols and waiting. But this was no symbolic vigil. They weren't waiting for the birth of baby Jesus. They were waiting to depart the earth, and 200 more people had come to watch them wait. A day earlier, Martin had received a message telling her the group was to wait at that place at that time for a flying saucer to land. They waited for 20 minutes for the spaceman to pick them up, as the message had promised. When none arrived, they went back inside. This wasn't the first time they were disappointed. It was the fourth. So basically, this woman started predicting that the end of the world was coming and that aliens would come and save a group of believers. So Leon Festinger, Henley Riken, and Stanley Schachter, they basically wrote a book called When Prophecy Fails. They infiltrated this group. So they basically pretended they believed it so they could learn about what these believers did when the things that were predicted inevitably did not happen. And by the way, y'all, we know that the world didn't end because it's 2020. This was back in 1954. I wouldn't be here, and neither would you if this were true. So the experiences of Martin and the other believers were influential on Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. So they kept pushing back the date, like, oh, I was wrong. My prophecy was wrong. It wasn't supposed to happen today. It was supposed to happen 2 weeks from now. And what they kept finding is that, no, that's not what happened. And when most people are confronted with a failed prophecy, they double down. They don't abandon it. So I actually know people who are disappointed that QAnon did not deliver on a lot of the things that have been promised over the years. And here's the amazing part. They admit that, but they're still committed to it. Because it takes a lot to admit that we messed up. It takes a lot to admit that we were wrong. Most of us would rather be right than be happy. So here's an example, a more mundane example of how cognitive dissonance works with grasshoppers. So how many of you have the belief that eating grasshoppers is disgusting? Raise your hand if you believe that eating grasshoppers is disgusting. Put it in the chat. Do you think that eating grasshoppers would be disgusting? There are always those groups of people that are like, someday in the future, we'll eat bugs as a source of protein. And I'm like, no. First of all, vegan. Bugs count as meat. Second, no, that's disgusting. So I think most of us would agree that eating grasshoppers is pretty disgusting. So let's say that you come to the psychology lab to help me with some research. And I'm like, hey, so Dr. Cohn found us these grasshoppers. Will you eat one for a part of this experiment? So here's the thing. You think that eating grasshoppers is gross, but I'm nice and you want to help me out. So you eat the grasshopper. And I know what some of you are thinking, Dr. Gilchrist, I don't care how nice you are, I am still not eating the grasshopper. And that's okay. But let's say you did. Hypothetically, let's say you ate that grasshopper. So here's the thing. You have a justification for why you chose to do that. You're like, I wanted to help out Dr. Gilchrist. She's really nice. So you don't really get an attitude change. There's no conflict here. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say that you go to the psychology lab. You believe that eating grasshoppers is disgusting, and there's a student assistant who's there instead of me. And they're mean, and they're nasty, and they're like, eat a grasshopper. And you're like, fine. So they're really mean to you. They're not very nice to you, but you eat the grasshopper anyway. So here's the deal. You don't have any justification for why you ate them this time. You can't explain, oh, I wanted to help them out. This person's been a jerk to you, and you still ate the grasshopper. So you got nothing to fall back on. So this person was a jerk, but you ate the grasshoppers anyway. This is a case of cognitive dissonance. There's no way to explain away your behavior at this point. So instead of saying, yeah, I still think grasshoppers are gross, but I ate one anyway, most of us are going to change our attitudes and go, eating grasshoppers wasn't that bad. You're like, shows what you know, Dr. Gilchrist. I would eat them and still think they were disgusting. And that's okay. So one of the other ways that we kind of see this is post-decisional dissonance. So this occurs when you have to choose one option from many that you end up liking, or that you end up liking. So you like all of the options, but you can only pick one. So how many of you applied to multiple colleges and chose Cotty? How many colleges did you apply to? 2? 3? Did anybody apply to more than 5? Hello? Is anybody on the chat? Oh, there we go. I was like, did the chat die? Okay, Emily, you did? All right. So here's the thing. Odds are, and I'm going to say something, and maybe this is a hot take or something like that. I believe that, yes, some colleges are better fits for people than others. But I would say that for most of you, you probably would have done fine at any college. You know, I went to Florida State University. I probably would have done probably just as well almost anywhere. But I ended up picking one college. You ended up picking one college. And even though there are a lot of other options that you like, you've got to justify to yourself why you picked one good option out of a bunch of other good options. And so this is where post-decisional dissonance comes into play. What you end up choosing will be framed positively. You'll go, oh, I picked Connie because I really like the small class sizes. I like the culture. I like how they're handling the pandemic, you know, all this stuff. And whatever you didn't choose will end up being framed negatively. So I've actually seen this in people who are kind of torn about quitting their jobs. Like they really love their job, but there are also aspects of it that don't make them happy. And then they end up quitting the job. And like for about a month before they quit, they trash the current job that they're about to leave to make it easier for themselves to admit why they're leaving. We have to do that because otherwise we would look back on every single choice we make with buyer's remorse. We don't want to do that. So what we're going to end up doing is justifying to ourselves why we made the right choice, when the truth is there are a lot of other different things out there that can make you happy. And it can be really scary to admit that there's the possibility that you would have been equally as happy or happier with a different choice. That's a scary thing to admit. So you got to try to justify it to yourself. So the thing that you picked is going to be framed more positively. The thing that you didn't pick is going to be framed more negatively. So I want to talk more about the role that justification plays. So I mentioned that you're going to be more likely to eat a grasshopper if the person that is greeting you is really nice, and you're not really going to get a lot of attitude change because you can be like, oh yeah, I was just helping that person out. So let's imagine that I make you participate in a really boring study. And I'm not talking about the normal studies that I do where you have to remember a list of words or look at colored squares for an hour. You're watching paint dry. You're staring at a wall. We're talking really boring. So you get done with this boring study. And then I say, hey, thanks for participating in my study. I'd like you to do something for me. I'd like you to lie to the next person who's waiting for the study and tell them how fun it was. I'll give you money if you lie. But here's what's really critical. I either give you $1. So I'm like, I'll give you $1 if you lie. And I know what some of you are thinking, Dr. Gilchrist, $1 is a pittance. True, but $1 can get you a candy bar from the vending machine. $1 can do that. Or I give you $20 to lie. You're like, yes, $20. We're having pizza tonight. The sweet's eating good. We're getting Domino's tonight. So here's the thing. Let's say that most people lie. So most people lie and say, oh yeah, Dr. Gilchrist's study was awesome. We did all kinds of cool stuff. We played Among Us and it was great. Now, so here's the deal. I either gave you $1 to lie or I gave you $20 to lie. What do you think that's going to do to your perception of how fun the study actually really was? So let's first talk about the $20 people. So they lied for $20. Do you think they are going to change their attitude about the study? Do you think they're going to be like, oh yeah, the study was great? Or do you think they're going to be like, oh, the study was really boring? What do you think? So if you get $20, how do you think that's going to change your attitude? Will it change your attitude about the study? Maybe a little bit because you got $20. But do you think you're going to say, oh yeah, that study was better than I thought? No. You can basically be like, I lied because I got $20. That doesn't change my attitude about the study. Now, somebody who's going to lie for $1, and yes, $1 will get you a candy bar, but $1 is not $20. You lied for money, for an amount of money that you can find looking at the sidewalk. Like somebody will inevitably drop $1. You can find $1 on the sidewalk. You lied for $1. Your honesty comes cheap. You sold out your honesty for $1. For science, but for $1. So here's the thing. Do you think that's going to cause an attitude change? You can't say you did it for the money. You didn't get that much money. So Bessinger and Carl Smith actually had people do this study. And here's what they found. The rating of the task enjoyment is on your y-axis. So this is basically the higher it is, the more that people enjoyed it. So here's what we find. For the people who were told not to lie, they're like, oh yeah, that study was really boring. For the group that got $20, they're like, oh yeah, that study was boring, but I got $20 out of it. So I like it more than the people who didn't get money. But the people who overwhelmingly thought the study was the best were the people who sold out their honesty for $1. Womp, womp, womp. So in this case, $1 was not a sufficient justification for lying. I'll lie for $20. Maybe. I'm a terrible liar, so maybe not. I'll lie for $20. Why would I lie for $1? I can find $1 in my bag right now. So the idea that if you can't justify it, you're going to end up with greater cognitive dissonance and thus greater attitude change. This is kind of how it works. Okay. So let's kind of explain why this worked the way it does. So the $20 group did not enjoy it. They just lied for the money. So there's low dissonance here. And this is your basic belief. I'm not cheap and I don't lie easily. And yet you lied for $1. You are cheap and you do lie easily. Sorry. So in this case, when you do a boring task and you lie for $1, this creates a lot of cognitive dissonance. And thus you're going to say that the boring task was fun. And what's more, you're going to believe it. $1 isn't much justification for choosing to lie the way that $20 is. Okay, does anybody need some more time here? Okay. So our actions can also change our attitudes. So I've already kind of talked about the fact that cooperation ultimately fosters mutual liking. One of the other things that we can find is that if you want to create attitudinal change, you want to start small. So this is what's known as the foot in the door phenomenon. So the basic idea behind the foot in the door phenomenon is that if I want to change your attitude, I'm not going to start by making you do something big. I'm going to start by getting you to agree to smaller tasks and then gradually ramping up the difficulty. So one of the ways that you can actually learn a little bit about the foot in the door phenomenon is, oh wow, I can hear a really loud voice on a speaker somewhere else. It's kind of cool. So one of the ways that you can actually learn about this is that the foot in the door phenomenon, and not that you should ever do this. Please, folks, use your powers for good. Don't use them for evil. But this is how brainwashing happens, so to speak. So this is what was done to actual prisoners of war, if I'm not mistaken, when they were either imprisoned in China or in Korea during the Korean War. So obviously, if these soldiers came up to you and said, denounce your US citizenship and give up on capitalism and embrace communism, like if somebody made you do that right away, you're obviously not going to believe it. Even if you said, yes, yes, I do all these things, you're not necessarily going to believe it. And you're not really going to be very useful. You're not going to cooperate. So if we want to brainwash somebody, what we do is we start with something small that doesn't require a lot of commitment. So in this particular instance, they had the prisoners copy statements. Statements about the problems with capitalism, why the United States was bad, why this particular country was good. Here's the thing, though, about copying. Do you have to believe what you're copying? No, you just have to do it. Next, they up the level of commitment by having the soldiers mention and list the flaws with a capitalistic system. That requires a little bit more commitment. You actually have to think about this stuff, and you kind of might start believing it. They then upped the level of commitment by having the prisoners in a group and make public confessions to each other in front of these other soldiers about the things that they had done and the things that they had seen. Even greater commitment. And so because you agreed to copying, it makes it a lot easier to agree to something with a slightly higher level of commitment. And you keep agreeing to these increasingly higher levels of commitment until all of a sudden you're like, yeah, the United States is a terrible place. I am going to renounce my citizenship and I'm going to embrace communism. And the thing is, this time, you actually believe it because you agreed to these small little tasks that didn't really involve a lot of commitment first, but because they put the foot in the door, you're a lot more likely to open that door once a foot gets in. Another example that's a little bit more mundane, people who agree to put a campaign sticker in their window, if you follow up with them a few weeks later and say, here's a really ugly sign, would you put this in your yard? People who agree to having a sticker in their window are a lot more willing to put an ugly sign in their yard than somebody who didn't put a sticker in their window. If I get you to agree to something small, I can secure your agreement later for a bigger task with a greater commitment. So the roles that we play also do affect our attitudes. Now, I will mention, I'm not really going to talk about the Stanford prison study. I don't think it's a very scientific study. There are a lot of ethical caveats. And additionally, over time, we have kind of learned that people were being very subtly influenced to behave in these ways to get Zimbardo the findings that he wanted. Having said that, though, roles can affect our attitudes, absolutely. So one of the things that we do find, for example, with the Zimbardo study that I do think is very interesting is that the ways that prisoners were treated is very, very similar to the way that we treat prisoners that we tortured. As you can kind of see here from a prisoner at Abu Ghraib in Iraq during the early 2000s. Okay, so I don't really want to start anything new right now, and we're 2 minutes away from class being done. So folks, have a wonderful weekend. There will be a quiz that we'll post on Sunday, so make sure you take it sometime over the Thanksgiving break. I will see you here on Monday. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and have a good weekend. Make good choices. If you're traveling, travel safe, and I will see you on Monday.